Good morning. How are you doing? Well, we have looked at a number of things in previous sessions. We have looked at what is psychology. We have looked at the goals of psychology. We have said that psychology is a systematic study of animals and human behaviors. And we have said that the goals of psychology are describing behavior, understanding behavior, predicting behavior, and controlling behavior. Now, we want to look at something that is very, very, very important: history of psychology, where psychology came from. It's a relatively young science, it's a relatively young concept, right? It came from an experimental route in the 19th century. Psychology is sort of a relative of sociology and philosophy. You know, philosophy speaks to knowledge, intellectual, you know, utterance, and so on. But sociology is really looking at groups, you know, at individuals in a more collective sense, while psychology looks at individual for what individuals are individual, right? So the psychologists will look at the individual within the family. The sociologists will look at the family unit and how it affects the individual. You know, sort of like that, right? So psychology, I don't want to think is a German. Psychology started really in Germany by a German science called Wilhelm Wundt, right? I hope you, well, he died 1920. He was born in 1832, right? I spell his name for you: Wilhelm Wundt, right? Um, Wilhelm is as I said, was a German scientist who was the first person to be referred to as a psychologist. So we call him the father of psychology. His famous book entitled "The Principles of Physiological Psychology," and that was published in 1873. Right? William William was he believed that the goals of psychology was to identify, well, the goal, according to him, the goal of psychology was to identify components of consciousness and how those components combine to result in our experience, conscious experience, right? Um, he used a thing that we call a concept that was called introspection. He called it internal perception, right? And it's really the process through which you examine um, your own conscious experience as objectively as possible, right? And it's basically make the human mind like any other aspect of nature that a scientist observe, right? So William was like that, right? A very very interesting person. So he was called the father of psychology. But moving on from introspection with William, there was this other person who have picked up on William's psychological concept, right? And this is William James. There's another William, right? So this is, well, that guy was William, this one is William. I keep mixing this thing up because William is William James. That William is the father of psychology, right? So William James, he was born 1842 and he died 1910. He was the first American psychologist. So William, let's not get this mixed up again. William was the father of psychology, the first person to be called a psychologist. He's a German. But now William James, 1842 to 1910, right? He was the first American psychologist who expound and a different perspective from William, right? So William James was introduced to Darwin theory of evolution by natural selection and accepted it as an explanation for our characteristics, right? The characteristics of organisms, of human beings, right? He's a very interesting person as well, and he he should be considered as one of the key person in this psychological arena, right? Um, as James saw it, psychology purpose was to study the function of behavior in the world, and as such, his perspective was known as functionalism. So William James speaks of functionalism, right? Um, and functionalism focus on how mental activities help an organism, help us fit into the environment. Functionalism was a second more was functionalism was basically the second concept since the birth of psychology, right? But more, it has a more subtle meaning in that functionalists were more interested in the operation of the whole mind rather than the individual parts, which were the focus of structuralism during during William during William time, right? So these guys are very very interesting coming from German, the father of psychology, to to the American psychologist Jones William James, right? So these are critical people in the start of the psychological concept, right? So from there, this guy Freud, Sigmund Freud, we know him as the father of psychoanalytic theory, right? Perhaps one of the most influential and well-known figure in psychology, in psychological history, right? Freud was born 1856 and died 1939, and he was an Austrian neurologist who was fascinated with his patients suffering from hysteria, right? And neurosis. So he basically was a physician, right? But he contributed to psychological perspectives. Hysteria was an ancient diagnosis for disorders, primarily affecting women with a wide variety of symptoms it has, including physical symptoms and emotional disturbance, none of which had an apparent physical cause. So he was very instrumental in that. Um, Fry theorized that many of his patients' problems arose from the unconscious mind, right? And in his view, unconscious mind was a repertory of feelings and urges of which we have no awareness. So he basically moved psychology into that realm. According to Freud, the unconscious mind could be assessed through dreams analysis, right? So he was that sort of a person, and his theory is called psychoanalytic theory or psychodynamic theory. And from Freud, we have a number of other persons who go into other psychological um, concept, coming from Germany right down. We have Pablo, we have Watson, right? Pablo studied a form of learning behavior called conditioned reflex. And we will look at him later on. That's Ivan Pablo, 1849 to 1936. Very interesting person as well. And we also have, as I have said, Watson, John B. Watson, 1878 to 1958, was an influential American psychologist whose most famous work was during the early 20th century, right, at Johns Hopkins University. While William and James were concerned with understanding conscious experience, Watson thought that the study of consciousness was flawed. It had that there was a challenge with it, right? Because he believed that objective analysis of the mind was impossible. Watson preferred to focus directly on observable behavior that we talk about overt and covert behavior, right? So he at that time he wanted to focus on observable behavior. Um, that's the overt behavior, that you can see. Um, so so that was important for Watson, and he tried then to bring that behavior under control. Once he can observe it, he's saying that it is possible to bring it under control. So how can you not observe a behavior and treat it and work with it, right? Watson was major proponent of shifting the focus of psychology from mind to behavior. So it's no longer mind. So the definition that you are seeing, right, that the scientific study of human and animal behavior and so overt and covert behavior, Watson have helped to develop that sort of concept. And for Watson, perspective, his concept is called behaviorism, right? So his approach is behaviorism. And a major object of study by behaviorists was learned behavior, something that you have learned. They looked at that, right? And its interaction with inborn qualities of the organism. So Watson looked at behavior that he believed that behaviors are learned, right? And your inborn qualities, your personality, right, will basically be a drive to how you learn these behavior and carry and act them out, right? Behaviorism used commonly use animals in experiment under the assumption that what was learned using animal model could, to some degree, be applied to human behavior. So this guy, John Watson, brought animals into the whole concept of psychology. B.F. Skinner, 1904 to 1990, was an American psychologist as well. Like Watson, Skinner was a behaviorist and concentrate on how behavior was affected by its consequences. And when we look at learning psychology, we look a lot at B.F. Skinner and his work. The Skinner box is also critical, as Skinner does his experiment, something we learn about. Maslow, and Rogers, they look at humanism, right? They're focusing on that during the early 20th century. American psychology was dominated by behaviorism and psychoanalysis, which is Freudian, right? However, some psychologists were uncomfortable with these concepts, right? They're viewed as limited in perspective, and and they objected to the pessimism and determination of Freud, and they didn't like these things, so they came up with humanism, right? Abraham, right, was an American psychologist who was best known for proposing an hierarchy of human needs, something we look at eventually. So he believed that, hey, humans do have needs and we have levels of needs. So he looked at that with a level of certainty, the self-actualization, esteem, social security, and physiological needs. He looks at that, something we'll go into at another point in time, right? Um, yeah, behaviorism emphasize the objectivity and focus of external behavior. I know it pulls psychology attention away from the mind into for a prolonged period of time into to to um to 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 how we conceive the environment and learn these behaviors. So it actually takes us into cognitive psychology, which is a very important psychology that speaks to how we think or our thought process and how we interact with the environment through our cognition. It's very critical that we understand that concept. Feminist psychology, right? The science of psychology has had an impact on human well-being, both positive and negative. The dominant influence of the Western, life and male academia, right, as been looked at by a number of females who came into the psychological arena with a sort of a feminine touch, and create this concept that is called feminist psychology, because they bring that sort of feminism into the psychological um, environment, which is very critical and important. Multicultural psychology, culture has important impact on individuals, as we know, and social psychology, something that we look at social psychology and cultural psychology, right? Um, there is a risk of psychological theory and data derived from a certain culture of the society, and therefore we have to consider culture as very influential in our psychological research and how we apply psychological theory, right? And if you do research, you will understand this whole thing about norming and so on, right? Because we have to be careful, or we apply research that was done in a particular culture to another culture. There must be some level of adjustment in order to get it right. So cultural psychology is very critical. Contemporary psychology is a diverse field that is influenced by all the historical perspective that we have talked about, and all the fathers of psychology. I'd like to call them all fathers of psychology because they are long before this whole contemporary psychological thing that we are now under. And it's very diverse, and a lot of time we bring all of that into the mix in order to create what we are doing now, as we call it, contemporary psychology. So that's where psychology coming from, and you can read up more on the history and perspective of psychology. Um, it's a very interesting concept, and you must understand that we have several types of psychology, and we will go into that a little more um, later on, right? In the next session, we will look at types of psychology: developmental, social psychology, abnormal psychology, and so on. We'll look a bit on a few of them, right, in next session. Thank you for listening, and have a psychological day. Thank you.